Welcome everybody. This is fun for me to get to talk about writing because I love to write. We're talking tonight about crafting the writer's life. And some polls they've done, 81% of people say that they have a book in them. 81%, that's a lot of people. We have a population of 328 million people in the United States, but there's only about 46,000 people that are actually on the rolls, I guess tax rolls, as being authors. And so when you look at that, that's not 80%, that's not anywhere close. But even more shocking, out of that 46,000, only about 9,000 make their living full-time as a writer. So, most of us go into writing not assuming we're going to make a full-time salary from it. It'd be great if we could buy a new computer with it. But it is still shocking to see how few actually do the writing. And so what we want to talk about tonight is how can we make it where we're one of those few that is actually doing the writing. It's not easy. When you hear numbers like that, it's sort of a confirmation. It's really not that easy. And so how can we have the writer's life? Oh dear. Okay. There we go. Have the writer's life, and how do we find time to write when we don't have any time? And that's the most common complaint for anybody that is writing, is how do I find the time? How do you find the time to write? And we're going to talk about some ways that we can do that. So my name is Susan Macias. I am not one of those 9,000 people that make a full-time salary out of writing at all. But I do love to write. And it is something that I've enjoyed to do for a long time. I dreamed about it a long time before I actually did it. And since I've started doing it, I find I want to do it more, which is a fun thing. So I'm sorry, my slides are being kind of funny. There we go. Okay. So I want to talk about what's normal for writers. Sometimes when we hear that things are a little bit challenging, we assume it's because we are doing something wrong. But that's not actually true for the writer. Here is what is normal. Most of us don't know what to say, don't know where to start, and don't feel like we have time. If anybody else out there feels like that, please know that that is a normal thing. Even when we have stories in our mind, even when we have things we want to say, when all of a sudden we have a blank screen and a blinking cursor, it becomes very intimidating to actually put the words down. How do we move past our thoughts to actually get things on paper? All right. I'm really sorry about, there, that worked. Okay, so here's an E.B. White quote. E.B. White wrote Charlotte's Web, Trumpet of the Swan, Stuart Little, and he said, I admire anybody who has the guts to write anything at all. And that was after writing for years and years successfully. He was one of those few that actually made a living at it. And yet he was able, he knew that how hard it was. It was hard to actually get it going. So if the act of recording your thoughts on paper is a little terrifying or seems impossibly difficult, know that it's the same for everybody. I used to think that if it was hard for me, it must mean that I really wasn't a writer. But that's not true. It's just hard. So I think one of the most important things to know in writing is your why. Why do you want to write? Because if you know your why, it will motivate your desire. And if our desire gets motivated, then all of a sudden we're able to figure out how to find the time to do what we want to do. So what is your why? It could be that you want to share a message. For me, that's why I started writing. I had thoughts and ideas I wanted to share, so I started a blog. I had a concept about a book on praying for our kids that I really wanted to write. I did that over many years to finally get it finished and then self-published it. I have more things. That's why I'm writing. I want to share a message. But it could be that you want to tell your story to your family. In our writers group at Man and Family Library, there's a lady there who did a great job of writing her life story. She wanted to convey to her kids what all had gone in her life, when she had become a Christian and what that meant to her. She wanted to pass that message on to her family. She wasn't looking to sell thousands and thousands of books, but because she persevered through writing, her why of motivation to share with her family carried her all the way through to getting this wonderful book done. You might just want to record thoughts for yourself. Here's something fascinating I thought when I learned it, is that I've always loved the devotional, My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers. It's one that has been very instrumental in my life. Oswald Chambers, though, did not set out to write a devotional. What he did was he was an avid journaler, and he recorded his thoughts. He recorded his studies over and over. And in fact, we know that he burned quite a few of his own journals. Once he would get a few years out, he'd just go back and burn them. But he died very young. He was a missionary. He was a teacher. And after he died, his wife and students gathered these journals together and put them together. And now it's this devotional that's sold millions and millions of copies for decades. So the idea of recording your thoughts, that is a valuable why of writing. And then maybe you want to put on paper a story that's been in your brain for years. You know, we have those things that pop up. What about this? It could be that. Or maybe it's that idea of something, that burning idea in your head that you just feel like you need to get out. I finally finished last summer a novel that I had been carrying around for 25 years. And I finally got it written. Now it's in the process of being rewritten, because that's a part of writing too. But it stayed with me all those years. And so finally I got motivated enough to write the story. But how? Okay, so why? We know why we want to write. Whatever you identify your why that you want to write. But how? How do we fit writing in to all the things that are going on in our life? Here, I'm going to give you several steps of implementation that were very important for me to move from thinking about writing to writing. And the first thing was that I finally called myself a writer. And it was actually a thing. Like, I stopped saying I want to write someday and realized, you know what, I really did write. I wrote a lot in comparison to people around me. I wasn't a published author. I didn't have any credentials to call myself a writer, but I wrote. And so I could call myself a writer. I think of it this way. I have a garden, and it's not a great garden, but it's a better garden this year than the year before and before that. And so I garden more than the average person. And I'm learning. I'm not a master gardener. I'm not going to have a gardening show or a gardening blog, but I do garden. I can call myself a gardener. My husband is a golfer. Does that mean he's on the PGA Tour? No, but he likes to golf. He goes out on the course. He'll go to the putting green or the driving range and practice. So he's a golfer. And in the same way, if we are desiring to write and we're making the effort to put words on paper, we are a writer. What are the advantages of finally allowing ourselves to tag ourselves as a writer? Well, I found that it really made a big difference for me. I found that once I said I was a writer, I could set aside time to write. Even in my own busy schedule, had a lot going on, a big family, homeschooling, all the things, but I could say, but I'm also a writer. And so because of that, I'm going to figure out where I'm going to find the time to actually do the writing. I could invest in my craft or hobby. It was a big deal for me personally to spend money on the writing, to spend money on getting that, maybe books about writing or going to a class about it. And so once I said, but I'm a writer, and if I'm a writer, all crafts have their supplies, right? So if I was doing a different craft, I would be going to Hobby Lobby and buying all the different supplies. So I could invest in myself as a writer. And I valued my own efforts more. I didn't just slough them off as my little scribblings, or, I mean, they're nothing. It's just my thoughts. I can say, well, I'm a writer, so I'm writing these things down. And because I'm doing that, I can take it further. So we're going to look at each one of these three things and how those also help us to craft the writer's life. So the first thing we talked about there in calling ourselves a writer is that we needed to set aside time to write. Because you know what? There's never enough time. And that's just a reality. I don't know that I've ever felt like I had enough time for all the things that I needed to do. And so when I started writing, it had to fit in the seams of my life. It had to fit around the edges of all these other responsibilities. But I did find, if I worked at it, that I could find those places and I could still write. So what does this look like? If we're going to find time in our busy lives and our busy schedules, we're going to have to schedule it, because what gets scheduled gets done. That's why the dentist makes an appointment with us at a day and a time and then calls us several times before to confirm our appointment, because they want to make sure that you have this on your schedule and you're going to show up. Well, nobody is going to call us to make sure that we're writing. So we're going to have to be our own person that's checking in to say we're doing it. But if you schedule it, then you're more likely to get it done. Once I was scheduling it more, I found that I moved to the next stage, and that was even better, and that was making a habit. So I would do it every day, and the regularity of writing is where the real magic is. It's showing up every day at the same time, or whatever particular days you can show up. I found my productivity soar when I was only writing for about 45 minutes to an hour a day. I mean, that's not very much. I'd much rather sit and write for 3 or 4 hours, but that's a very rare occurrence. So if I wait for that, it's not going to happen very much. But once I set a habit of I'm just going to write some every day, all of a sudden I had more and more words on the page. I had more and more to work with, and I could move forward. And that was the real change that happened. I also found that I wanted to craft my environment. I like to be cozy. I like to feel good about where I am. And so for me, I needed to have my comfortable chair, and I would have my coffee and my water and a blanket for my legs, and I would get all cozy in there, and that would help me have a good attitude about writing. There's no reason to sit and be uncomfortable and then think that we're going to have this great writing session. And then the other thing that enhanced my productivity is I always put headphones in. We have a big family. People are always coming in and out, and I can pretend I'm by myself when I have my headphones in. The other thing I read somewhere, and I tried it out, and it really, really worked, was I used the same music. So I found a classical for studying playlist on Amazon Music. And that is what I put on when I'm writing an article or a blog post or even just ideas. That's kind of, and because it's the same music that I'm hearing every time, it like tells my brain, oh, it's writing music, you should be writing. For my novel I told you I've been writing, I actually found an album that I bought on iTunes, so it can just stream across my computer. And it was music that gave me a bit of the mood and the setting of my novel. It reminded me of the emotion of it. I searched for a while to find it. And then when I put that music on, all I think about is my story. It's become sort of that Pavlovian dog, you know, if you keep coming and knocking at the door, you'll get the treat. And so this is what happens in our brains. We can program our brains to be more set up to be productive. Because part of there's not enough time, and so we're trying to find the time, is that we want our time that we're working to be very productive and very effective. And that's what happens. These hints all help that to happen. So the next thing was I was a writer, and the thing that moved me forward in writing was deciding that I got to invest in my craft. And that took a little bit because, you know, just like there's not enough time for most people, there's probably not enough money either. We've got to really budget everything. So setting aside some money for myself to say, I am going to become a better writer, I needed to get trained. It was the only way to get better, was to stop and to really try to get better, learn more. So how did that look for me? There's all kinds of books on writing, craft books, and that's what they call them. It's because it's writing as a craft. We think of writing as like people are either very talented and therefore they write well, or there's the rest of us that just write okay. But the reality is that writing, like all other things, has to be learned. So just because a person is very, very musical does not mean they can pick up a violin and whittle off a concerto very, very quickly. They have to train, they have to learn, they have to study. Writing's the same way. And once I figured that out, it was real freedom. So a couple of books that really I just loved. The very first book I bought that I said, I walked into Half Price Books, and because they have a little section on writing books, which is a great place to feel good about buying your first one when you don't want to spend too much money. But I walked in, I bought this one because On Writing by Stephen King is one of the most highly recommended writing books. And I'm not a Stephen King fan as far as his fiction, but his writing book is really fantastic. And it's a memoir, so it gives you a picture into somebody that was very successful eventually and how hard they worked and the things they learned along the way. There's a lot of great things to pick up from there. Another book is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, and I love this book. It's lovely. She's funny and poignant and also helpful, and so that was a really great book. And the title comes from a family story of hers. Her brother had this big project. He was supposed to do all of these things on all the birds of their state. And he put it off and put it off and put it off. And now here he was stuck with just a few days to get this whole project done. And he looked at his dad and he said, Dad, how am I going to ever get this done? And the dad said, bird by bird, son, bird by bird. And that was a saying that stuck in her mind that said, you just have to do one thing after another after another. And that's pretty much what finishing any writing project is like. The War of Art is a great book at the library, by the way. I checked it out, and that is where I first read it. Great book. Stephen Pressfield, he wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance and some other things. A very successful writer. But this book talks about how hard it is to sit down and get the writing done. That there's this thing called resistance, and it's like a person in the room all the time, and they're resistance sits beside us as we're trying to write, telling us you really can't do this, and boy, that's not a very good sentence, and don't you think you'd rather go watch something on Netflix? That's resistance. And everybody has it, even highly successful people. And so that was a great, not so much how to write, but recognizing some of the things that were going to come into play. And then The Art of War for Writers by James Scott Bell. James Scott Bell has all kinds of craft books. He wrote a whole bunch of them for Writer's Digest. And this little book, though, I just love because it's these short little chapters. You can just read them like a little writing devotional that you just sit down, you read, get some insight on something, and keep going. So that's another one I recommend. The other thing that I invested in was a computer program. There's several out there that can help you write. I love Scrivener, but I will say it has a learning curve. And here's the freedom as a writer. You get to choose the tools that make you more productive. If it makes you cry, you don't have to use it. You know, if you try to use it and it just feels overwhelming, that's okay. You don't have to use it. But sometimes it can be very helpful for organizing things. I use it probably about 10% of what Scrivener does, but that 10% makes a huge difference for me. So writing is an individual craft in that you're sitting there by yourself doing it, but you get to figure out the ways that help make it work for you. The other thing that really will help you get better is studying even outside of books. Writers' conferences are a fantastic thing. They are also very expensive. But here we are in the year of COVID. Nobody can have a conference, so they're all going online. Consequently, they're much, much cheaper. Not only is the entrance fee cheaper, but you're not traveling, you're not having a place to stay. So the whole process is much more accessible. So that's something you might want to check out. There's also courses online. There are a lot of people, I have some names at the end of this that I will put up that you'll be able to see some names of people that I recommend. And they have courses that you can buy, and there's a pretty wide range of cost there. But if you find a course that really works for something you want to learn, that might be something you want to invest in. But there's also YouTube, there's podcasts, there's lots of writing blogs, and that's all free. And it's great information. It's all out there. And so investing in getting better might be investing time. It doesn't necessarily mean investing money, but there are great places and resources out there that if you put a little bit of that, of your time of writing, you put into getting better, you're going to find that everything flows better. So the next thing is that I committed to finding assistance. Writing is a very solitary thing, right? If people are around and talking to me, I'm not writing. I can't at the same time. I like words. So if words are around me, I can't do it. So there's that. We're all alone. But we also need help because it isn't something that we can do all of it without getting that kind of reinforcement for. And so that was a very important thing. We need community. The writing group at Mammon Family Library, of course, unfortunately, we're not meeting right now with COVID, but Hill Country Christian Writers, that was a great place because I was going to show up every week. And there were times that I was finishing up my writing project and pushing print really quickly to try to get it off the printer to rush up on time for writers group. And if I hadn't had writers group, I might not have ever gotten it written. If you've ever heard of the group, the Inklings, they were a writers group that had C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, and several other very prolific writers out of Oxford. And a lady that had done a lot of studying was talking about this group and how J.R. Tolkien was an avid procrastinator. And you wouldn't think that with all those pages he wrote. He was a terrible procrastinator. And she said the only way the Lord of the Rings got written was that he wrote it every Wednesday night because he had to show up on Thursday at the Inklings group. So having that accountability is a great thing. Sometimes accountability can come through a friend. Maybe you find another friend that is writing and you just tell each other at the end of the day, at the end of the week, okay, how many hours did you write? Oh, really? I wrote this many hours. Okay, knowing you're going to have to tell somebody how many hours you logged writing every week will really help you find that time. It also could be accountability with somebody who's not a writer. Maybe they're trying to exercise and you're trying to write, and you just help hold each other accountable. It also helps us to be brave because, like Evie White said, it's scary to write. It can be scary. I'll tell you the other thing that being in the writers group did, and this is to be brave, was to show my writing to somebody. I mean, it was one thing to write it for myself. It was another thing to hand it to people and for them to read it and for me to read it out loud to them. It kind of made me sick the first couple of times I did it. But it was so good because then I got help back for it. The other thing is to read other writers' stories, like that Stephen King memoir. But there's lots of great biographies or memoirs of writers, and that helps you to see that, you know what, they struggle too. It's so much easier for me to struggle when I know it's normal. When I struggle and I feel like I'm the only one struggling, and I'm only struggling because it's hard for me because I can't do it, then I get discouraged. But if I go, oh, it's hard for me because it's hard for everybody, then all of a sudden that changes and I'm freed up to just let it be hard and keep doing it. So I wanted to let you know this is part of it being hard. I found these statistics on how hard it was to get published. And so when I'm writing, I just remember this because I'm not just writing to get published, and it's a good thing. Gone with the Wind was rejected 38 times. Isn't that amazing? Lord, Wrinkle in Time, 29 times. Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is now like its own industry, was rejected 33 times before it ever got accepted into print. C.S. Lewis got 800 rejections. That makes me feel so much better. I'm sure there were ones for articles and different things to have that many rejections, but 800, the man wrote a lot and he kept submitting, and that's why we have so much great work, but he had to write way more than ever got published in order to get to there. Stephen King's first big novel is Carrie, and this story is also in his book, but he actually was so dejected. He'd gotten rejected over 30 times. He threw the novel in the trash can. His wife got it out of the trash can, and then she made him submit it another time, and that time it got accepted. And it became this runaway bestseller, and he earned $39 million in 2012. So he's definitely one of those 9,000 that is making the living out of writing. But it was all from the perseverance. Judy Blume sold 80 million books. 80 million books are children's books. She got nothing but rejections for the first 2 years of submitting her books. J.K. Rowling, very famous. She was rejected like 27 times, and she had been rejected by all the publishers in Britain. And finally, one of those, the last one there that she had put it into, his 8-year-old daughter somehow got a hold of it, read the book, said, "Daddy, you got to publish this." And so they gave her a very small advance and published it. And she's the first author that ever became a billionaire. So there you go. So it's hard for everyone, and it's good for us to remember that. Gene Fowler is an author who said, "Writing is easy. All you do is stare at a blank sheet of paper until drops of blood form on your forehead." And then Ernest Hemingway has a famous quote, "There's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and open a vein." Sometimes getting words out feels like that. But those are the best words, because those are the words that are deep inside. Those are the words that kind of have that resistance to getting out. But it's getting that heart of ourselves out that is going to be our best writing. But that takes time to get to. If we write 1 week and then 3 weeks later we come and sit down and write a little bit more, and then sit a little, another month, and then we get to go and have like a 3-hour time, and then we don't write anymore. It's hard to get down to that vein pulling writing. But if we have that regularity, we're going to find that the deeper words are easier to come out. So finding the time to write. It turns out that finding the time to write is like finding the time to do anything. It's choosing what to do and choosing what not to do. If I'm going to garden, I've got to dig in the dirt. And if I'm going to play golf, I've got to pick up a club and swing at a little ball. And if I'm going to write, I have to sit down and write. It is as easy and as hard as that. We have to choose to write. It's finding time is not meaning that all of a sudden that we're going to have loads of free time. It's going to be, where can we find those little bits of time that we can regularly sit down to write and do that. There's a lot of famous writers that had a full-time job before they ever made money at writing. Jerry Jenkins is the author of all of the Left Behind series. He's one of those 9,000 that makes his full-time living out of writing, a very nice living now. But he, for years and years, he had a young family. He had a job, but he wanted to write books. So he would get up at 4:30 in the morning. He'd put a board in between 2 chairs to elevate it up to be a desk. And it was back in the day of the typewriter, and he would type. And he would do that every morning for the amount of time that he could do, because he didn't want to do it in the evening because he had young kids he wanted to be with. So choosing to write is saying, I am going to find where there is time, even if it feels like I have no time, and I'm going to commit to it, and regularity. James Patterson, who is the richest author, I believe, in America, and he's prolific in writing. But he began as a lawyer, and he would go into his law office every morning very, very early, and he would write before anybody else showed up. That was how he accumulated the skill and the words to get his books. The 6 golden rules of writing. Read, 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 and write, write, write. Reading is another part of our development as writers. As writers, we want to just fill our mind with beautiful words, with different ways of expressing ideas and thoughts and descriptions. And we get that from all the reading we do. And so the more variety you can have in good books, then the better that it can be you will find your writing improving from that. And then your writing improves also from more writing. The more you write, the better it will be. If you wait for inspiration to write, you're not a writer, you're a waiter. I love that quote. Or sometimes I hate that quote, but usually I love that quote. Sometimes you just have to, there have been times I've sat down and thought, I got nothing. I don't know what I'm gonna write about. And so sometimes you just have to say, I think I will start just writing about my backyard. And you can just write anything. It doesn't have to be on your thing that you're trying to produce. Writing words is a great way to do it. If you really have no idea what to write, many people suggest get a really great piece of literature, prop it open, and type it out. Because there's something about typing the flow of good words that will do something in your brain. And so if you're really stuck, that's another way to stop being a waiter and start being a writer. You can always edit a bad page, but you can't edit a blank page. And that hurts, but it's true. We can't edit something that's not there. I'm in the midst of rewriting my novel, which, I wish I'd figured out a better way to write it before I'd written it. But the reality is I couldn't be doing the work I'm doing now without doing the first level of work. So now I'm back and I'm reworking it and I'm changing things around and I'm improving it. But I had to get it down first. And sometimes that's how it is. We have to get our words on the paper. You don't have to have perfect words. You don't even have to have everything spelled right, and you don't have to worry about punctuation. You just want to get the words on the paper, because once they're on the paper, you can work on them. You shouldn't edit while you write. You should just write. Start writing no matter what. The water does not flow until the faucet is turned on. And that's Louis L'Amour, another prolific writer. And sometimes you just have to get going and just write. Write the story. Write the nonfiction book or the article that you're thinking about. Get it going. It's okay if later on you decide the first 3 pages I just need to cut and get rid of. That's okay. Those first 3 pages got you to where you are at a place where you could write. So part of finding the time to write is freeing ourselves up from feeling like that time we're spending writing has to be productive and has to be exactly the book that I want to write or the article I want to write. Actually, just writing anything will eventually make whatever that work is in your heart, it will make it better. Just open the faucet and just start writing. And eventually you might feel like you get to a place where something gets unlocked and it flows even better. So my writing, I wanted to share with you the things that I had done. My first thing that I completed after many years of blogging, I wrote a book called Unceasing, A Parent's Guide to Conquer Worry and Pray with Power. And this book is partly alive because of the Christian Writers Group, because it was from bringing my work there and getting feedback and having to show up with something that I got that book eventually finished. I self-published it. It's something that I did about 3 years ago. It's still selling, and I still have that out there. And now I think I think I could write a better book than I did 3 years ago. I certainly hope so. But that I was able to do and get out into the world, which is fun to have a message you want to share and get it out. I published a devotional that guides women through praying for their daughters. And that is also something that I've self-published, and those are both available on Amazon. We live in a day and age where we no longer have these big, few publishing houses that have these gatekeepers that we can hardly get into. And when they look at all the books, if you really go through the process, to get into a publishing house to be considered is an incredible thing, and very, very few books that get in. But then once those books get in, out of that, about 25% get printed. So getting printed by a publishing house seemed like such a far off goal, I couldn't even imagine it. But we live in a day and age of self-publishing. And there are several different avenues for that. And so we're able to get our ideas. We should get them polished and beautiful and really high quality, but we can self-publish them. And that's a great thing. The other place I do a lot of writing is on my blog. And that is the place I think that I've gotten the most practice, is just by blogging, because I have not been as regular lately because I've been doing some other projects, but when I wasn't writing a book, I was blogging, and I was trying to do it every week. And so it was this consistent practice of having to get my words out there. And it was a practice in bravery, because I was putting them out there where people could read. It wasn't like there was tens of thousands of people reading them, but people were reading them. And sometimes I'd be somewhere and somebody go, oh, I really appreciated your blog about, you know, whatever. And I'd be, oh gosh, people are reading it. So I had to get brave in order to do that. And so blogging is a great way to get that going. You can start a free blog on blogger.com. I believe that's all still up and running. There are several ways to blog and to do it free. And that's just a great way to practice and get going. I have all the social media places. If you ever want to connect with me there, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I look at that as another place to write. I will sit, and when I have an idea I want to convey there, I will write and edit and get my words as well as I can, exactly what I want to say. And that's a practice on writing. On Twitter, you have a limited amount of characters, so you can only write a shorter thing. And so not on every morning, but on many mornings after my morning quiet time, I will try to synthesize the chapter of the Bible that I read down to no longer than a tweet. And I will put that on Twitter and put the reference and put that. And that's like a challenge to me. How can I get all of this big idea down to this very small thing? So all of those are ways that we can actually practice our writing. Some people look at Facebook and Instagram and they call it microblogging. They do a longer post on one of those social media places, but it's more of an idea. And people, if they're interested in your idea, will stop and read it. And that's another way to be able to practice your writing and practice your bravery to get it out there. I love Madeleine L'Engle. She wrote, I just forgot the name, A Wrinkle in Time, and some other wonderful books. She said inspiration usually comes during work, not before it. And there's this sort of mythical muse idea in the arts, and particularly in writing, that suddenly we're going to have this wonderful inspiration and the words are going to flow off our little happy fingers. And we're not going to even have to work that hard because something is writing through us. And that's a lovely thought. There are a few times in my writing life where I have felt like my fingers couldn't quite keep up with my brain. And it's wonderful. That's rare. Most of the writing is slogging through, getting words down, going, I don't even know if that makes sense. And then coming back to it the next day and editing it and improving it and working on it. But if you get out and you get writing and write more and write more, pretty soon you might find that inspiration does happen to show up. Roger Ebert, he was the famous movie critic, but he also did a lot of writing. He said, just write, get better, keep writing, keep getting better. It's the only thing you can control. And that's so true and so good. We can't control where our words are going to go. We can't control, honestly, if we would ever get picked up by a writer's agent or get published by a big publishing house. We can't control even what other people think about our writing and the feedback we might get. But what we can control is what we do, how we choose to use those little seams of time in our life to write, to read craft books, to do the next thing, so that we are improving our writing. And something happens when we invest time into improving our writing. We're more motivated to find the snippets of time to write. Finding time is about prioritizing the action. We're going to prioritize writing when we invest in making ourselves better at it, when we think about it, when we learn about it. Then we're going to be that much more ready to write. Now, there's one thing I want to warn you about, because I hear a lot about this, like at writers' conferences and groups of people will talk about people that are always saddling up, but never getting on the horse. And so that's if you're thinking about writing and you're reading the books about writing, maybe going to writers' conferences, doing all the things, but not writing. All of these suggestions that I'm giving you are designed to fuel your desire to write, to fuel when you are writing to be more productive and to get more words out. But we still have to sit down and write. Reading all of the wonderful craft books on writing that there are will not make you a better writer unless you put them into practice. I encourage you to get those books, mark them up, highlight them, make lists out of them. You're a student, just like in college. I had to write notes, I had to study notes. The same thing as this. It's a skill I want to improve. I have to study and I have to get better at it. So, how do we find the time to write? We search for the seams, we prioritize it, we schedule it, and then we actually sit down and write. That makes all the difference in the world. And so we're going to go to questions. If you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. And I want to put my recommended resources up here. And I'll just leave this up while we're chatting. Bethany, I can't see the chat box, so if you want to feed me questions, that would be great if there are questions in there. But in order to keep sharing my screen, I can't do that. But I wanted to tell you about a few of these resources. Jerry Jenkins, I told you about, he's the one that wrote the Left Behind series. He has a great website for writers. Lots of great free articles. He also has some paid courses that you can use. He has there's some kind of writers guild that he has that you can do membership to that has access to lots and lots of courses. And so that's online. KM Weiland, her name is Katie Weiland, but she goes by KM Weiland online. She has a great writer's blog. Her blog is called Helping Writers Become Authors. But if you just put her name in Google, she'll pop up. She also has a great podcast. Basically, she's reading her blog post out loud, which is great because I don't have as much time to read. So I love listening to her podcast. She very regularly comes out every week with a new podcast, and they are all on writing. C.S. Lankin is another person that has some really nice courses. Jane Friedman has a lot of free information plus paid courses. Joanna Penn is very big industry person in the self-publishing world. So she writes lots of her own books. She does like some mystery suspense kind of gothic thing, but then she has a lot of books she writes on writing. And she has a podcast that is also on writing that I find very, very helpful. And so she's there. Ellen Brock is on YouTube, and she has a great set of YouTube lessons, and they're short. They're only 10 to 15 minutes, and it's all on fiction, on writing character, on writing scene, on how to start your book, on how all kinds of things. And so that's great. That's free, and it's right there, and it can be when you're stuck on something you can find to help. Hope Writers is another guild kind of thing. They have some free resources. They have a nice podcast that kind of gives you some good information. Most of their information is a thing you join as some kind of membership. I've never joined, so I can't tell you if it's worth it or not. But they do have good information. And then, of course, our lovely Hill Country Christian Writers. Judy is on here. She is the mastermind and heartbeat behind Hill Country Christian Writers. And it has been a blessing to very many people to help us get our work done. Meets at Mammon Family Public Library, and we meet on Tuesdays, and hopefully we'll get to meet again soon. Maybe, Judy, we need to start meeting online or something because I really miss it. But it's a great resource. It's a great place to get feedback. There's nothing like handing your paper out and you'll read. I can't tell you many times I've had my section and I hand it to everybody and they're reading on their paper while I'm reading off mine. And I have gone over that thing 15 times with the fine-tooth comb. And yet all of a sudden I'll see a word misspelled or some weird grammar. We have lovely grammar people in there like Judy, who knows all the things about commas that I don't know. And she'll help with that. And people will say, I didn't quite understand, or that sentence sounded clunky. And that way, we know what we mean to write. So we'll write it and it makes sense to us. But if someone else hears it and they go, what? Then you know, oh, I think I need to work on that sentence some. So that is a great resource, and it's right here in Bulverde. So those are the things. I'll leave this slide up so you can see it.